First of all, let me talk a bit about my bona fides for being here. As you know, the National Lawyers Guild has actually had a role in the foundation of the National Coalition to Protect Political Freedom. I was a member of the board with Dr. Erlinder when this began. We met because I wrote a series of articles after the not the Bush administration, but the Clinton administration passed the original material support laws after the Oklahoma City bombing, when an American bombed the Oklahoma City courthouse, and the Clinton administration responded by passing a law that outlawed foreign terrorist organizations, and then made it a crime for Americans to support foreign terrorist organizations, like those in Buffalo. Right? But I wrote a series of articles at that time pointing out that terrorism would be the new communism. And of course, unfortunately, that has proven true. And we've heard a lot of discussion today about the Muslim people being targeted, which of course has been true. But in order to put this in its political context and to understand the nature of the struggle that we have, I want you to remember that in 1917, the Espionage Act was passed, in which people were identified as being opponents to World War I, because if they opposed the draft at that time or made statements against the war, they would be locked up and sent to prison. Eugene V. Debs, the head of the Socialist Party and the presidential candidate, was sent to federal prison. He got 1 million votes while he was in federal prison. He was eventually pardoned. There was a revolution in Russia. The Soviet Union was established in 1917. The Sedition Acts were passed. The Palmer raids occurred in 1920. People who were identified as foreign supporters of socialist countries were wrapped up and arrested wholesale and deported. And from 1920 until the early 1990s, if you were identified as being affiliated with a communist organization anywhere in the world, you could not enter the United States. For more than 70 years, the Supreme Court cases that are being used now, that the material support law was written to get around, they said, of course, that it was illegal to be a member of a communist party. So the Clinton administration wrote a law saying it's illegal to provide material support. It's not that it's illegal to be a member. Oh, you can be a member, because the Supreme Court said you could be a member of a communist party. You just can't do anything if you're a member, or if you're a supporter. You can't provide any support that's material. That's what's the crime. In order to get around the laws that were declared unconstitutional in the 1950s. Although you still couldn't come into the country if you were a communist, because controlling the borders was different. So by passing these material support laws, they got around the First Amendment. But then 6 weeks ago, the Supreme Court said, in response to Elena Kagan asking the question, well, Ms. Kagan, under these material support laws, does that mean that if someone goes to talk to an attorney, and the attorney says, here is my advice, and the attorney speaks to someone about what they should do in doing something illegal, like going to the United Nations, is that speech material support? And Elena Kagan says, oh yes, it is. Now material support has become speech. And then the Supreme Court said, in their opinion, Well, we don't know exactly where the line is between material support and speech. So we'll decide on a case-by-case basis, which means that the FBI can go out and arrest people or have grand jury investigations in situations where they think it might have crossed the line between speech and material something, like passing out a leaflet. It's material. Just like the two Somali ladies that I've been advising back in Minnesota for the last year and a half, who collect old clothes and send them to a refugee camp in Kenya, who said, what should we do? We're collecting old clothes. It's our zakat. We're sending them into the place in Kenya where there's people who need it. I said, well, ladies, you know, if you send them to the refugee camp, the government's going to come and say, Al-Shabaab has supporters in the refugee camp. And so Al-Shabaab is going to get the Mickey Mouse t-shirts. So it's material support for terrorism. Everybody knows Al-Shabaab wears Mickey Mouse t-shirts. And 1 month after the Supreme Court changed the law, 12 more Somalis were indicted in Minnesota, including the two ladies who sent Mickey Mouse t-shirts to Somalia, to Kenya. And then, thank God, it finally happened. Some non-Somali anti-war activists got subpoenas in Minnesota a couple weeks ago. Finally, it's gotten out of the Muslim ghetto. Finally, we have a situation where the rest of the world, the rest of the community, knows that Pastor Niemöller in Germany was right. Remember? He said, first they came for the communists, and I wasn't a communist, so I didn't speak up. He said, then they came for the Catholics, and I wasn't a Catholic, so I didn't say anything. And then they came for the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't raise a voice. And then they came for me, and there was no one left. What this coalition is based on the wisdom of Sami al-Arian and other people who have understood that the attack on the Muslim community is not just an attack on the Muslim community, it's an attack on democracy in a situation where the United States is now becoming a country that has become so militarized with an economy and an international policy that is so broad around the world that dissent in this country, whether it comes from Muslims or support for people who are opposing U.S. policy around the world, whether it comes from Muslims or whether it comes from guys like me who are opposed to the U.S. policy in Central Africa that has killed 10 million people in the last 15 years who are not Muslim, who are Christian, which you haven't heard about because someone told you that the Rwandan genocide was caused by the guys who lost the war, told by the guys who won the war, who were financed by whom? The Pentagon. And the story has been told by whom? The State Department. Because the U.S. is engaged in a new imperial project in Africa. Because why? It's the only continent on the world, in the entire world, that is now open for exploitation because Latin America is not continuing to accept it anymore. My friends, unfortunately, the Muslim community, unfortunately, is the canary in the coal mine. This coalition has the beginnings of the possibility of saving democracy in the United States. It has the possibility of changing a foreign policy that is dangerous to all of the people in the world, not just the Muslim world. My friends, this coalition, to be put in its proper perspective, is one that the American people need more than they know. During the last 7 years, I've been representing a Somali guy named Mohammed Warsame. He went to Afghanistan and Pakistan before 9/11. If you take the government evidence at its worst, he taught English to Taliban nurses, material support. He had dinner one night with 75 other people where Osama bin Laden was present. His body was material support. And when he got back to Toronto, he's a Canadian citizen, married to a U.S. citizen, legally in the United States. He sent 2,000 back to the people he stayed with in Afghanistan. He says, they're my friends. They're not politically related, has nothing to do with the Taliban or Al-Qaeda. The government says they are. How do we disprove what the Pentagon experts say their connections are? We have a speedy trial law in the United States that's built on a speedy trial provision in the Constitution. The law says 70 days. My client spent 6.5 years in solitary confinement waiting for trial, and I was never able to get him a trial. After the change in government, the Obama administration came to us and said, well, if you'll plead guilty, you'll just have to spend 1 more year in Terre Haute, and then he can go back to Canada. Or you could roll dice. Maybe he'll get 20, 30 years. We don't know. What do you want to do? Next week, perhaps, if all goes right, we'll be crossing the bridge into Windsor. Because he taught English to nurses, had dinner with the wrong people before 9/11, and sent 2,000 back to his friends that he can't prove are not connected to the wrong people back there. And up until now, in Minnesota, I could not get the peace and justice community interested in the case. No demonstrations, no anything. Last Friday, we had a really nice demonstration because his grand jury summons had just gone out, and the peace and justice community is now engaged. And I can guarantee you now that people are beginning to see that this is not just a Muslim struggle. This is not just you, this is all of us. And this coalition has the potential of doing what we did quite successfully with secret evidence. But unfortunately, it's now on a grander scale. Because it's not just stopping secret evidence at a time when there is not a generalized attack. It was at a time when the Republicans and Democrats had not both agreed that U.S. policy is to continue the generalized assault on the world. Now we've got both the Republicans and the Democrats agreeing that this sort of policy is something that Obama should do, as well as the Republicans. Because remember, it was Elena Kagan who argued that the material support law should include prohibitions against speech. We don't need the Republicans to be in office to have a problem. So, I'm happy to recognize that this is beginning. I want you to remember that it took 75 years of struggle to get rid of the laws that kept communists from being able to come into the United States. So when you get home tonight and you talk to your kids, let them know that they've got work to do as well as their kids having work to do. We might as well get started now. It's not going to be easy. We've got a couple generations of work to do, but there's no time like the present. There was the greatest American in history is Frederick Douglass, in my view. Slave, freed himself, became an advisor to President Lincoln. He said, power concedes nothing without demand. Never has, never will. Those who want freedom without struggle are like those who want the crops to grow without the rain. We got to be struggling because the rain and the crops are things that we're going to do for ourselves. But we'll do it together. Thanks.